Growing up in Ohio and seeing almost all the batshit things that this state has to offer, I guess it's understandable that I've grown numb to the weirdness going on around me. I mean, when you go to a gas station and the little screen thingy on the pump gives you messages like, "You're a trespasser in God's lands," almost every day you just learn to take the weird with the mundane. Heck, sometimes they even intermingle. There are late nights at the college bookstore where I sometimes can't tell our normal student customers from their black-eyed doppelgangers who come in looking for books I can never find on the shelves. Or I forget it if I've already turned off a computer that has eyes on the monitors following my movements or trying to print out a list of weird instructions, which of course I throw away. I listen to my crappy boss, not some stupid anonymous paper from our old as dirt, barely chugging along computers and their sticky, smelly keyboards. Sometimes I even think I see this strange, somewhat attractive man pop in every now and then just to see what new additions we have, only for him to vanish seconds later. And I guess recently, I also haven't noticed when my said crappy boss leads pretty young women into his back office, and I also never notice when they leave, either. The office is on the other side of the bookstore, directly in my line of sight, and there's no back door out of it or even a window, so it's not like they could leave any other way. But we can get pretty slow after the start of each semester, and you'll usually find me behind the desk reading a book of my own, and not really paying much attention to anything that goes on around me. Today, though, that changed. Something, or rather someone, caught my attention. I was sitting down reading a new book. Today it was House of Leaves, an absolute beast of a book I bought recently after doing a deep dive into some of those old Slender Man YouTube series. The book is almost like an art experiment as much as it is a story, some pages only holding a single sentence or word, some chapters written out in spirals across their pages. It was one of these spiral chapters that led to me noticing the man in the back corner of the bookstore. I was holding the book up and turning it in my hands in an attempt to read when I saw him, rather large, a mixture between a dad bod and a lumberjack, shuffling around while wearing his tattered and stained brown trench coat and fedora. Great, I thought. A homeless guy snuck in again, and Pete, my shitty boss, is nowhere to be found, leaving tiny Liberty rings to deal with this big lug. Setting my book down, I slid off my seat, dragging my feet across the store's stale beige carpet as I made my way to him. Amongst the unusual hum and flickering of the yellow-tinted overhead lights, and the chatter from the library bookstore was attached to, nothing seemed out of the ordinary at this time. My only concern was if this guy was going to prove to be a problem or not. "Oi!" I called to him as I got closer. "Can I help you get something, sir?" He didn't seem to hear me, just continued what he was doing, which was staring holes into my boss's office door. Rolling my eyes, I tried again. "Sir, hello. If you aren't here to buy anything, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," I said. This wasn't really a rule we had in the store, but it often worked to get people out when they were just going to cause trouble. This guy, though, still didn't even acknowledge me. Maybe he was drunk or on drugs. Either way, it didn't work for little old me. Why couldn't he be out begging on the tree lawn instead of bugging me in here? Don't get me wrong, I sympathize with the homeless. I was there once for a short period of time, but I did not want to deal with some druggy or drunk or drugged out drunk. I hesitantly reached out to poke his big arm when a voice called out, like a whisper, directly in my ear but somehow far away at the same time, making the goosebumps on my arm start up. "Excuse me, miss." By now I know this routine, though they were here earlier than usual. Craning my neck to look behind me, I recognized a girl from my world history class, Alexis Bigsby. Her pretty white smile reached a pair of inky black eyes. It was the exact same with the other two girls behind her, though I didn't know their names. Alexis, or rather her doppelganger, had been coming around a lot lately, always asking for the same book, To Mock a Mockingbird. "Sorry," I said, trying to hide the edge of annoyance in my voice. "We still don't have that one." The doppelganger gave a high-pitched, teetering giggle one of her friends mimicked almost perfectly. These things always gave me the creeps, but today they felt even more off than usual. I couldn't tell you why. Maybe it was the higher volume in which they made appearances lately, earlier and earlier than usual, or maybe it was just the giggle. It was giving me a hard, uncanny valley. Then abruptly, the giggling stopped and they were silent as the grave. With their eyes pitch black as they were, I could never really tell just where the Alexis doppelganger was looking, but at the moment I got the intense feeling that she wasn't looking at me, but rather behind me, at the man. Something was very wrong. I turned to look back at the homeless man, only for him to reach one of his massive hands out and tightly grip my arm. jerking me back and shoving me behind him with such force that I nearly slammed into the nearby wall. I was so close to the guy now I could smell the mixture of cigarette smoke and cheap cologne that wafted off of him. I don't know if it was that or the current situation that made my stomach churn. Probably both. "Hey," I cried out once I overcame the shock of being manhandled. "What the hell is your problem? Stay away from the kid." He barked at the Alexis doppelganger and her friends, his voice croaky, sounding like the gargled gravel every morning. "This is the only time I'm warning you, little shits. Stay away from the kid." More teetering giggles was the only response he got, and I once again found myself reiterating that something was very wrong here. The other two girls swerved around the man. Then they decided to walk out, but they more like glided, like ice skaters. I realized they were going for me and I pushed off the wall, ready to make a run for it, but the man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something in his closed fist. When he opened it, I saw purple sand inside. He blew the sand into the air in the direction of the girls and they both froze, their postures rigid. Alexis's doppelganger let out that giggle again and she lunged for him. I don't even remember seeing him move. His hand suddenly gripped her face, smearing that weird dust on her, and she screamed. Just like every sound she made, it sounded like a whisper directly into my ears, while at the same time sounding distant. It was awful. One by one, the girls, or whatever the hell they actually were, dropped to their knees and I saw just what the dust had done to them. Their faces were covered in large, pulsing boils and blisters, almost ready to burst. I was definitely going to puke if they did. "Come on," the man said, and then I was pulled away from the awful sight, the man gripping my arm again and pulling me back to my desk at the front of the store. I kept looking back at the things, and as I feared, one of those boils popped. I don't want to go into detail, I'll just say that whatever it was that came out melted that black-eyed girl's face, like some sort of acid. I jerked away from the man and ran behind my desk, immediately bending over the small plastic trash can I had back there and promptly losing my lunch. Some of it even got in my hair. I fucking hate Ohio. When I straightened, the man was still there, but the doppelgangers were nowhere to be seen. He reached an arm out, offering me some crumpled napkins and a flask. I didn't think, I just took them. Stupid, I know. Luckily, the only thing in that flask was something alcoholic. It burned a little. I'm not much of a drinker, and I admit I gagged, which he seemed to find rather funny. This man was twice, maybe 3 times my size, pale with a messy 5 o'clock shadow that desperately needed trimming. He had long black hair that poked out from under his fedora. "You okay, kid?" he asked, and I almost expected gravel to tumble out of his mouth. "You've been seeing those things a lot? They come around a little?" he said. Sometimes," I said, and I handed him back the flask with a shaky hand and he took a swig of it himself before shoving it back into his pocket. "They'd never done that before. What did they want with me?" I said. "What are they? And who the hell are you?" He held up his free hand, pulling a coffee-stained business card out of his pocket with the other and placing it on the table. Wrinkling my nose, I picked it up, reading it over. It was a business card for Boston's Best, a detective agency stationed out of a hotel with the same name. I knew of it. I passed it from time to time when I was out running errands, and this guy was ironically named Boston. As I looked up, this man, Boston, was using more napkins to try and get the puke from my hair, and I honestly kind of appreciated it. "Okay, well, that still doesn't answer my other questions though. I'm here to investigate a series of missing persons reports." "Okay, well, he was avoiding my questions though. It seemed like his pockets were bottomless as he pulled out about 3 Polaroid photos from them. Each was of a different, very attractive woman around my age, and each had a name under them. Stephanie Reynolds, Jamie Niels, and Sasha Sanados, all posed like they were taking school photos, all smiling wide. They'd light up a room unlike me. It was like looking at missing posters of images of dead girls you'd see on the news, both of which I am far too used to seeing now. For a moment my mind flashed to Heather, my best friend in high school, who I had the luck of finding dead and dried out in some broken wall in the school's basement. She had been missing for more than a few days, and she had been pretty dry, almost like a mummy. These young ladies were last seen talking to Pete Ness, the manager here. "I'm assuming you work here, kid?" he said. Boston took me from my thoughts and I gave a slight nod. He returned it, stuffing the photos back into his coat. "Meet me at the Denny's up the road after you close up. I have some questions for you, but I don't want to ask them here. And look out for those black-eyed freaks," he said. He turned on his heels and strolled out of the store before I could accept or deny his orders, coat tail fluttering behind him as he went. I'm now sitting in the back booth of Denny's, drinking my 3rd pop. So far he hasn't shown, and I'm thinking I was stood up. Then, after about 20 more minutes, he appeared. He sat down across from me with a grunt, ordered the lumberjack breakfast with coffee, and then proceeded to pour the remainder of whatever booze he had in his flask into said coffee. I didn't even need to order. I usually come here after my late shifts, which used to be daily, but had recently changed to only about 2 or 3 times a week. My usual waitress, a short, plump Asian woman named Cindy, was awful for conversation, which is fine, so am I, brought my order first. The 2x2x2. 2 eggs, 2 pancakes, and 2 sausages. I gave her a thin smile and nod, and she left without a word, going to deal with a new customer who just walked in, a scruffy-looking guy in a stained shirt. Like me, he came in often, and his clothes were usually stained despite being business casual. This time I almost swore it looked like blood though. Yeah, I think I'm going to keep our ongoing relationship of never interacting ever the same as it's always been. I looked down at my food and began to eat. So, Boston finally spoke up after loudly slurping his spiked coffee. You handled that situation well back there, all things considered, minus losing your lunch, of course. You deal with that a lot often, he said. I held up a finger, wanting to finish chewing my food before talking. Scruffy was taken to the complete opposite end of Denny's, out of sight, his usual seating arrangement. After swallowing, I answered, yeah, they'd come by about once, maybe twice a week, always asking for books that we don't have, or never even exist. They'd never attacked before, though. Always seemed pretty docile, just super annoying. And I don't like their laughs, it's very, very annoying to me, I said. Oh, okay. Well, they tend to be pretty picky with who they nab. Luckily for you, Squirt, I don't think they'll be bugging you again anytime soon, he said. Jesus Christ, nobody had called me Squirt in years. I wasn't sure how to feel about it. If he called me Champ, though, I was definitely going to deck him. Never call me Champ. So, what's your name, Squirt? Boston at least had the decency not to talk while eating. I was hesitant at first to give my name. I always was. It carried a weight and I had no interest in it. Licking my lips, I glanced out the window. The sun had gone down hours ago, and while I wouldn't say Cleveland, or at least this part of Cleveland, had much of a nightlife, it was still pretty busy out there. Liberty, I said finally. Liberty Rings. If Boston was familiar with the name, he didn't let it on. The Rings family is decently well known in Ohio, and a good chunk of other states too. Oil tycoons and all that. I wasn't involved in any of that. I hadn't been for a long time. But when your family is that big of a deal and you don't meet their standards, well, they don't keep you around long. Boston cut into his piece of ham before pointing his fork at me. That's a stupid-ass name, he said. I know it's true, but hey, I thought to myself, you should get yourself another name to go by, he said. He continued, stopping only to shove the ham into his mouth. I rolled my eyes and cut into my own food. Well, my friends call me Libby. Weren't you here for some important investigation and not to, shit on my name? I said. Hey, it was just a suggestion, kid. Libby, Squirt, whatever. Anywho, what can you tell me about this boss of yours, Pete Ness? Despite getting his food after I got mine, Boston had already torn through half of his. The guy ate like a vacuum. I set my silverware down to think. I'd worked in the university's bookstore for almost a year now under Pete the entire time. He was a short, slimy man. Literally, his skin always had a hairline to rival Elon Musk's. Why any of the pretty girls that Boston was searching for would have anything to do with him was beyond me. He's a shitty boss, I replied. Normally he never shows up for work, on time or otherwise, but lately he's been taking the night shift over. He claims it so I can focus on my homework more, I said. You don't find him attractive, do you? Boston asked. Then he chuckled when he saw me immediately cringe. Yeah, I don't think so. Good, Boston said. The guy smells like old salami left in the sun. Why the hell would I find that attractive? I said. Boston slapped the table so loud both Cindy and Scruffy came to see what was going on. My dinner date was rocking in his seat, continuing to slap the table as he laughed a deep belly laugh. It actually sounded nice, and in that moment, under all the stains and cheap cologne, Boston looked like the friendliest person you could find this side of Cleveland. Scruffy, not so much. His eyes darted between me and Boston for a moment, and they looked almost wild, not entirely human. It even looked like he was sniffing the air, but once they both saw that nothing was going on, he and Cindy walked away. This moment, one I could almost call warm in a way, was very short-lived. Pete Ness, that slimy toad, walked past our window, talking to some young woman who held onto his arm. She was beautiful, dark skin and long brown curls that tumbled down her back. Once again, I couldn't understand what someone like her would see in that crappy guy. Pete happened to glance over and waved when he saw me, wiggling his fat fingers and giving a wide smile. Too wide. Just enough that it wasn't right. Boston gulped down the rest of his coffee in one motion and rose to his feet, walking to the cash register. I pushed my seat back and followed after, just in time to see him slam down a $100 bill, mutter to Cindy to keep the change, and rush out of the Denny's. Cindy just grunted, putting the money in the register. I shouted a thank you to Cindy before taking off after Boston, glad in that moment that I had always been a fast runner. It had often been a necessity growing up. Are we following him? I asked, and Boston glanced at me from the corner of his eye. We? He said. Yeah, if my boss is like a serial killer or some crazy shit, then I want to know about it, I said. Oh, okay, you're pretty curious, huh? Boston's tone was stern. You know, curiosity killed the cat, he said. Uh-huh, and satisfaction brought it back, I snapped back. I was managing to keep my pace with his long strides, not taking my eyes off of him. The sigh Boston gave me was one of exasperation, but the grin on his face told another story. He grabbed my arm and quickened his pace. All right, kid, keep it up then, he said. We weaved through the crowds, most students I vaguely recognized, having left school for the night and going out to party or eat and head home. We were far enough behind Pete to keep an eye on him without him easily noticing. He and the girl were heading back towards the university. Good, that was a straight shot, no twists and turns where we could possibly lose them. And then we lost them. Pete and the girl veered off the path leading to the university, instead opting to go through the back alleys. I don't know what sort of crazy spell Pete had over this girl, but she seemed fine and dandy following him through the cramped, unlit alleyways. She was even giggling as he said some stuff I couldn't hear. Then, after about 5 minutes of going left and right around corners, they were gone. I'm not sure how they managed to slip off without being seen. Maybe we'd stayed too far behind them in a bid to remain unnoticed. But they were just gone either way. Shit, Boston hissed and held a hand out in front of me, reaching into his pocket and removing a revolver from it. You need to stay behind me, he said. Is a gun really necessary? I asked, following his direction as he began to creep forward slowly. The weapon made me really uncomfortable. If your boss ends up being a serial killer, then yes, my little friend. Peacebringer here is necessary. Oh, okay, for fuck's sake, he has a name for this thing? I thought, how ridiculous. Okay, fair. Just watch where you're pointing that thing, I said. Boston then grunted in response and then stopped dead in his tracks. A soft metallic twang had filled the air and I immediately knew what it was. I'd gotten enough busted noses as a kid to know what blood smelled like. I craned my neck looking this way and that, trying to find the source of the scent, but Boston found it first. He crept forward past one alleyway, two. At the third he stopped, gun raised. As I got closer, pausing to look into each alley I passed, I finally saw the blood pooling at the entrance of one Boston stood at. I licked my lips, a lump in my throat. Everything in my brain was screaming at me to run. My survival instinct was trying to kick in, trying to get me to get the hell out of there, but I was just too damn curious. Anybody there? Boston called out, but not a soul answered. Then he glanced back at me, whispering, You got one of those fancy little flashlights by chance? The sort to go on keychains or something? Luckily I did. I turned it on and handed it to him. Boston pushed forward and stepped into the alley, gun and light aimed together. I went in after him and regretted it. What I'm about to describe next is not for the weak of heart, or in my case stomach. Not even 5 seconds had passed before I was bent over, hand pressed against a nearby wall as I puked up all the dinner I'd eaten, not even an hour before at Denny's. The beautiful woman Pete had been walking with literally moments before was sprawled out on the ground, her limbs twisted and her mouth cracked open, fresh blood still dripping off the corners of her lips as she stared dead-eyed at the night sky. Her chest had been completely torn open, like by an animal. Ribs poked out and chunks of flesh littered the ground around her. Flesh and a pair of breast implants. From where they sat on the ground and the blood on the walls, it was safe to assume that whatever or whoever had done this had thrown them, angry-like. Oh boy, I heard Boston say over my retching. He turned to speak to me, then finally noticed the state I was in. With a sigh, he put the gun away and made his way over, taking my long black hair in his fists and doing his best to hold it back for me. Come on, kid. Once you can hold it in, we're getting you home. There's nothing else we can do here, he said. After another minute of me adding to the mess on the ground, Boston grabbed me some of the newspaper that littered the ground and used it to clean my mess before calling the police. It was smart. We didn't want any evidence that we had been here when the cops showed up. My head was spinning as we walked together towards the university where my car was waiting. My throat burned. I was completely exhausted. I was beginning to regret getting involved in any of this, and then I remembered Heather. Finding her dead like that and how little the cops put into investigating it. To this day, it's still unsolved, a cold case. I couldn't make myself drop this. I guess my curiosity is just too strong. I've always hated spirit mediums. They're inconsiderate assholes, usually in gaudy clothes and fake accents, scamming people out of their money and using their dead loved ones to do it. It's a despicable, dishonest career, and to this day I will always hate the fame and money people like Ed and Lorraine Warren got with this scam, even if I do like their movies. During late nights when my brother Ronnie isn't working part-time at Movies, we'll watch bad reality TV shows that involve mediums and debate if they're legit or not. I always win. Apparently, Boston doesn't share this point of view. Madame Esmeralda was a tall, lanky, middle-aged woman with an obvious fake tan and red hair so poorly dyed that the gray roots looked like they were waging war with it. She wore typical gaudy, chunky jewelry and flowy, layered clothes you'd expect from someone like her. She even wore ankle bracelets. Apparently, she worked with Boston every now and then, and while that should have made me believe she had at least a grasp on what she was doing, I find myself doubting it. She'd met us at the Denny's where I'd spoken to Boston 3 nights ago, and when I walked in, she was already going on about how she didn't like Scruffy, who sat in his usual seat on the other side of the restaurant, very clearly able to hear her from where she stood at the front. The guy always made me feel uneasy, but I honestly felt bad for him. There he sat, stained as usual, eyes bloodshot and bagged from a clear lack of sleep. A few bruises were on his face, and he was just trying to eat his damn meal while this crazy white lady was going on to Boston about how his ka was wrong and he was clearly dangerous like a wild beast. I made eye contact with Scruffy and he almost seemed to smile when I rolled my eyes and gave him the universal gesture for "this bitch is nuts." "Hey kid, there you are," Boston greeted me when he noticed my arrival. He made me stay home the last 3 days to try and recuperate from what we found in the alley. That poor woman. At least he gave me a chance to spend the holiday with Ronnie. He got me Pokemon Ultra Moon, the newest game in the franchise. "I told you, my name is Libby, not Kid." "Well, you should pick a new name to use then," he said. "You don't want anyone we chase down to track you by your name, right?" he said, and he had a point. "Alright, I'll think about it. Also, shouldn't your friend be a little bit quieter if she's going to talk about someone within earshot?" I said. I gave the woman, whose name I didn't know at the time, a frown. One she returned. "I am Madame Esmeralda, seeker of the dead and the truth, tool for spirits to speak through and share their knowledge with. And you are Libby, it seems." She said my name with disdain, and the feeling was mutual. Before I could react, she reached out and grabbed my face, turning it this way and that, running her finger along my cheekbone and jawline. I felt very uncomfortable. She even pulled my glasses away and held my eye open, staring into it. After giving a huff, she let go, handing me back my glasses. "There is nothing special about this girl. You should send her home before she gets too involved and hurt," she said. Well, that was a load of total crap. "Trust me, Esmeralda, I know what I'm doing with this one," Boston assured her. This woman was proving to have zero sense of personal space as she snatched one of my hands and held it palm up, dragging a long green nail across it. Frowning, she pulled my hand up closer to her eyes. A palm reading. I knew of them, of course. Nearly everyone knows of them in this day and age. Back in high school, well, one of my high schools, a goth guy gave me a palm reading. He told me I would die in a house full of strangers and that an axe would be involved. "You are, as I said, nothing special," Esmeralda said, still running her nails over my palm lines. "Nothing you have done in your life up until now has been important, and nothing you do after this in your life will be important either," she said. Boston then grabbed my wrist and pulled it from her grasp. "That's enough of that, Esme. The kid is sticking around and that's it. Now stop bothering her and the poor guy back there, and let's go get to the scene," he said, and then he dropped my hand and turned to leave the Denny's without another word. I shot Esmeralda a frown and quickly went after him, shoving my hands into my jacket pockets. Anyone who knows Ohio knows how awful the cold is this time of year. Just another reason to hate this place. "You seen your boss around lately?" Boston asked over his shoulder, and I shook my head. No, I was just pulling some overtime during the break that day. I haven't stepped foot in the school since." Good, he said. "Then we're returning to the crime scene. You gonna be okay with that?" he asked. This time he actually glanced back at me. Yeah, I'm good." I gave Boston a nod and he gave me a crooked half smile before pulling his hat over his eyes and turning down the next alley. Left and right and left and right. When we got closer to the crime scene, Esmeralda pushed past me and followed Boston as he stepped over the yellow tape. The cops had already cleaned up everything. Now all that was left was a smell and dried blood, and a homeless woman crouched near a dumpster in the far corner. Not too strange considering the area we were in. The other two didn't acknowledge her, so neither did I. "Yes," Esmeralda began, lifting her arms in the air just as the wind picked up. causing her long sleeves to billow in the air dramatically. I can sense a presence here, yes. You said this was a scene of violence, correct? She turned to face Boston, arms still outstretched. Yeah, a girl I seen with my suspect, he said. As they spoke, I noted the woman near the dumpster shift in her position, head lifted to watch us now, and my blood turned cold. It was the girl. Boston? I tried to say, but Esmeralda spoke over me, her tone louder as if to drown me out. God, I hate her already. Yes, I sensed the girl. She is here, she said, and she walked slowly towards the corner, but not the one the girl sat in. She is here. Yes, here. Dear, hello. Hello, can you hear me? I am Madame Esmeralda. What is your name? She said. And I have to tell you, she looked like an absolute nut job talking to that empty corner. I looked back at the girl who was now twitching her head to the side uncomfortably, like the jerky movements from a Japanese horror movie. Something was vibrating nearby. Esmeralda then carried on. Elizabeth Witt. That's a lovely name, dear, a very lovely name. And one that she could have just gotten off the news yesterday when they reported the murder, I thought to myself. The urge to roll my eyes was so hard it actually hurt. Can you tell us what you remember first, just about yourself? I know how stressful this must be for you, and in cases like this, things can seem blurry, she said. Can you start with your parents' names? She asked. More things she could have easily gotten from the news. Joshua and Clementine Witt. Yes, of course. I'll talk to them for you, dear. Again, the girl twitched, this time in a more aggravated manner. What's your favorite color? Yellow. Yes, that's mine too. It's a great color, Esmeralda said. This went on for like 5 minutes. Pointless questions and that damn vibrating getting louder and louder each time, but nobody else seemed to be able to notice it. And that woman in the corner was twitching more and more, the motion becoming almost aggravated. Then finally, as Esmeralda asked one more question, the woman stood, and my breath got caught in my throat. I've seen ghosts for as long as I could remember, but I've never seen anything like this. It was the girl, Elizabeth Witt, just as pretty as she was the last time I saw her, at first. But with each jerky step she took towards Esmeralda, she changed. Her skin grew pale gray and no sound came from her mouth as it hung open. Only this black liquid, almost like blood, but just not. I could feel my stomach lurching, trying to force me to dry heave. I forced it down, balling my fists and digging my nails into my skin. I wouldn't, no matter how badly I trembled and my stomach churned. I wasn't going to throw up. And then it happened. Her chest burst. It was like the day we found her, ripped open, laying in her own blood. I felt my legs buckle and staggered to the dumpster, collapsing to my hands and knees as I still tried to will myself from not puking. That vibrating was so loud and right in my ear. I tried to focus on it, keeping me from throwing up. With a shaking hand, I groped under the dumpster until I felt something vibrating madly. Pulling it out, I saw that it was a gray flip phone adorned with some bear charms. I flipped it open and was greeted with a background of a smiling Elizabeth Witt and some woman I didn't know, but they looked similar. A mom, maybe? It made my heart drop. This was her phone, and it was blowing up with messages from no number. Can you see me? My name is Elizabeth Witt. Thank God someone can finally see me. My parents are Joshua and Clementine. Green. No, it's not yellow. I didn't say any of that. Why are you lying? Liar, 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 shut up. The text messages read. I clutched the phone to my chest, and I continued reading the text messages, my hand shaking as I turned to see Elizabeth screaming in Esmeralda's face, while that hack was completely unaware of it. As she screamed, the phone gave a long, seemingly never-ending vibration. I nearly dropped the phone, fumbling with it in my hands as I forced myself towards them. My legs felt like lead and my head felt hot. I may not have thrown up yet, but I might pass out, I figured. It felt a lot like when I found Heather's body. Esmeralda, I said, and I tried, but if she heard me, she was pretending not to, asking more questions and making the ghost of Elizabeth Witt angrier and angrier. Now, I was a lot less worried about throwing up and more worried about pissing myself. And then I saw tears streaming down Elizabeth's face and my fear became something else. Anger. Esmeralda, I yelled this time and she whipped around, one of her stupid long sleeves nearly whapping me in the face. I am working, child, she snapped back. Very important work. Work you couldn't possibly understand, so unless it's something that cannot wait. I immediately interrupted her. You aren't speaking to Elizabeth Witt, I snarled, shoving the phone in her face. You aren't speaking to her, and she knows it. The color drained from Esmeralda's face, and she started to open and close her mouth like a fish. The phone stopped vibrating for a moment, then started once more. I looked at it. The text read, "Can you see me?" Taking a deep breath, I turned around and nearly jumped when I found the ghost mere inches from my face. I swallowed, nodding. Yeah, I can see you. Can you tell me who killed you?" I said. She stared at me blankly for what felt like the longest time before one last message was sent to the phone. "Pete Ness," the message read. Thank you, I told her. "I promise he isn't going to get away with this." "Boston," I said, and turned to the large man who was staring holes at me with a look of mild interest. "What are we going to do next?" I asked. "Next, you go home and get some rest, and then tomorrow we do a stakeout at the bookstore." "I doubt Ness can wait much longer to target another girl," he said. Boston didn't even bother speaking to the still babbling Esmeralda as he strolled out of the alleyway. I gave one last look to Elizabeth and silently promised to come back to her one day before jogging after him. Boston went the opposite way from my apartment, but he left me with one last word. "You did good today, kid. And tomorrow, we're gonna get this guy."